I look back on podcasts that I've done in, like 2015 or when I was the height of, like, it's just, I'm in such a different chapter now that it just doesn't feel, I don't resonate with it at all. And I think that, it's where I was at the time, but I think that if I look back on it now, a lot of it was very performative. I was only that was one aspect of myself, and I was going to like hone in on that. And it just doesn't feel like me anymore.
Yeah. It was all about performance and tactics and what do you eat and how do you train and what are your life habits and all of that. But from afar, I've kind of watched you, on this arc, this like evolutionary path that you've been on. And, we met, I think the first time we met was at the Mind Body Green conference, like, it was like 4 or 5 years ago or something like that.
Yeah.
And I just remember like being super intimidated by you. I was like scared of you. You were like this mega champion. I think there was a hike one morning and I was like, I'm scared of that girl, man. And but I think looking back on it now, I was reflecting on that a little bit this morning and I was like, what was it about you? Yes, there's certain like insecurities that I have that made me intimidated about your accomplishments and what you're able to do. But I think also like subliminally or maybe unconsciously, I felt like you also, you like walled yourself off a little bit. Like you were emitting some kind of frequency, like don't get too close.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I've been told that before. People call me like an ice queen or something. And I never consciously projected that. I think that it's very much, I think that for me comes from a place of insecurity myself. And that very much so, I remember seeing you and I knew who you were and being very much intimidated as well, but not knowing that kind of air of standoffishness that I think that I may have like portrayed a lot at the time was my own insecurities.
Well, I think it's also indicative of, this disease that we're going to talk about, as somebody who's, been in recovery for a long time myself. I mean, our stories are very different, but there's a lot of similarities, the lawyer thing and the 12-step thing and the, ongoing struggle and all of that and the, ultra endurance. I'm somebody who's been steeped in recovery for, 2 decades and have worked with a lot of people over the years. And I think, what it is when you're harboring that secret, like you don't want your intimacy is your enemy, so the idea of being open is terrifying to anybody because what happens if they find out? Right.
What happens if they find out? And in a long time when I've thought about, talking about my eating disorder, it always in the back of my mind is like, you can't unring that bell when you do finally talk about it. And I've had multiple people tell me that. And it's not so much, I think that a lot of is that disorder thrives in shame. The disorder thrives in kind of, holding it close and not being open about it.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, you also worry about how is everybody else going to view you now that they know this? And are they going to treat you differently? And for me too, when I've had people say, oh, you're a great role model for my child to look up to, for my girl to look up to. And I, God, if I come out about like, am I now, that I've been hiding all of this. And so it is very much something that has been, kind of like this difficult, this difficult dance to kind of figure out
once you let it out of the bag, you can't unring that bell. But the fact that it's eating away at your soul, it's like you're a ticking time bomb, right?
Yeah,
so when somebody says to you, oh, you're such an inspiration and a role model, you're like, that pit in your stomach of realizing like, you don't really know, that fraud complex.
Right. And you don't know the entire story. And so it's for me is this feeling. People ask me like, why did you talk about it now? And I go, it's for a lot, it's to kind of align my head and my heart and who I am.
Yeah, you can't be a fully integrated person unless you own that. And knowing that, the disease thrives in the darkness and feeds off shame, all of that, it's ironic because you can intellectually understand that, and yet it's terrifying to step outside of that.
Right. And I also wanted to make sure that I was actively in recovery doing things, and for so long, I kind of told myself that I was, but then I actually really wasn't. And so
did you believe the lie?
I knew that I was not in a good place. That
for how long?
Oh man, probably, I would say for at least the past 6 or 7 years. I would say for probably the entire time that I was in sport. I think very early on in sport, I could tell myself that I was doing well, and I could think that, oh, no, I'm just managing it, it's there, it's kind of in the back of my mind, but I'm doing well, I'm competing well, I'm winning races, I'm winning world championships.
So how bad could it be?
How bad can it be, right?
Yeah.
I knew where I had come from. I knew where I was when I was 16 years old. I knew where I was when I graduated college, and, I was on death's door for a lot of that time. And I was like, I'm not there. So at this point, so clearly it's not that bad.
Yeah, you don't fit the mold or the stereotype of what somebody who has an eating disorder looks like. And what I connect with deeply about that is, look, we're both type A competitive people.
Right.
We've both had success in our lives, and that success, at least early on in earlier phases of our respective careers, was driven in large part by self-will, right? I'm going to do this. I am self-reliant. I'm taking responsibility for my path. I can't rely on anyone else, and I'm going to buckle down. I might not be the fastest or the smartest, but I'm going to outwork that person. Right. And you quickly realize when you get results doing that you can leapfrog over people. But if you're also harboring an addiction, you can use that facility that you have to rationalize your behavior, because as long as you're waking up at 4:00 in the morning to go running, or you're meeting your deadlines at work and you're graduating summa cum laude and all of these things, you can then say, well, I don't really have a problem. And it perpetuates the condition that then just continues to foment and grow. Right.
Because you say, well, I'm fully functional, and that's what I said. I was fully functional throughout all, the vast majority of the disease, and so you say, okay, is this really a problem when I am so high achieving, when I am doing all of this? But when I kind of took a step back and really looked at my life in this past, year or so, I said, yeah, I'm fully functional, but it feels so hollow. It feels so hollow. And I thought that there could be more out there.
Was that hollowness the bottom, or what was it? The multiple fractures? What brought you to that place and that that sense of self-awareness where you were ready to kind of own it in a different way?
I think that yes, it was the string of stress injuries. It was clearly the string of bone injuries that kind of gave me a wake-up call that there's something not working here. But even more so than that, it was the fact that I would come home to my apartment at night after work, after training, and then just look around and be like, all I have is my disorder. And it was much more that I had walled myself off from relationships, from being engaged. I would go to all these races, but I wouldn't want to go out to dinner with everybody else the night before because I couldn't. It was petrifying to me, and I had to do my safe thing, and I had to be in my safe space. And that's just a really, really hollow way to live.
And exhausting.
Very exhausting.
And lonely.
Very lonely. And you spend so much time, and I'm sure you can relate to this, just trying to protect all that, to try to do your thing. And it's exhausting. I was so tired of spending so much time obsessing about food. And I was ready to be done with that.
Right. And then every journalist wants to talk to you about it.
Yeah, I'm like, no. And that's why if you ever listen to any interviews with me, when I talk about food, I always say, oh, nobody should take a cue from me on food. And I have been, and I will say this, I will say that I have been 100% truthful in all of the interviews about that. And, you know, and I was afraid, like, what are people going to think of me now that I've like talked about these things in the past and, you know, talk about me eating Pop-Tarts and stuff. Oh, I eat Pop-Tarts. I do. Yeah. You know, that's.
Well, the funny thing about the Pop-Tart thing, I mean, that's like your signature move.
Right.
But what's interesting about that, like looking back now in retrospect, is the extent to which, maybe you're not, maybe I'm projecting, but it appears as if that could act as like this foil or this mask, like, hey, I'm so carefree about my diet. I eat Pop-Tarts. Right. Like, it's almost like a defense mechanism, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it is like a defense mechanism. I think a part of me now looking back is a bit overcompensation, is that I don't want people to think that I have an issue. So
if you're eating Pop-Tarts all the time,
clearly I don't have an issue.
Keeps them at bay.
Right. Yeah. You know, and I think that also, you know, eating disorders take all different forms. And so it's not just the super healthy, like orthorexia person that only eats fruits and vegetables, you know, like everybody within the realm of eating disorders, it manifests itself differently.
Yeah. And we're in an interesting time where, you know, everyone's talking about intermittent fasting and all these, you know, the diet wars are afoot and people are very passionate about this. And now we're seeing these think pieces coming out that are kind of shining the light on how some of these protocols are really just eating disorders masked.
Right.
You know, it's all about your relationship to them. I mean, certainly there's advantages to intermittent fasting and good things about it, but if you have an unhealthy relationship with that practice, it can be another way of shielding like a deeper problem.
Right. And I think that for a lot of people, it doesn't rise to eating disorders, but it could arise to disordered eating.
So what is the technical difference between those?
As
somebody who just came right out of treatment, you really have all the language.
Well, yeah, I will say that I will speak, you know, all of this. This is an N of one for me. And so I'm not, you know, I don't have degrees in this, so I just want to give that caveat. But I think it really is when it rises to like how problematic does it become in your everyday life, you know? And so I think in everything, it's probably like with alcohol, is that how all-consuming is it? So I don't think that there is like a hard line. I'm sure if you looked at the DSM-5 criteria between, you know, what actually is an eating disorder versus what's kind of like disordered eating practices, I'm sure that there's something there. But you look around sometimes and you think, God, everybody has disordered eating if you look at this. And I think that also prevents people, and prevented me, I think, from seeking help. Yeah. Because it was almost like, what's the point? Everybody seems to have a messed up relationship with food nowadays. Is there anything better? Can there be quote unquote normalcy?
But that's a function of measuring yourself against other people as opposed to measuring yourself against yourself and whatever you feel is missing, like that hole that you were talking about. It's like, you know, everyone gets a DUI. Like, you know, it's like no big deal. You have to get a couple before you.
No, and like, you can rationalize. And that's what I was doing at least for the past few years, was kind of rationalizing my way out of the fact that I knew I was still hanging on to my disorder. Is that I was looking around and saying, well, everybody's screwed up. So why am I so different? And that was actually reinforced by people when I had a few people where I would tell them about my issues and they'd be like, yeah, you have an issue with food. So does everybody.
Right. Welcome to humanity.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, it's a spectrum thing. And, you know, in your case, and I know I experienced this, like the universe starts knocking on your door and giving you these little signals like, hey, you know, this might not be the right path for you. Little cracks in the firmament start to happen. And if you don't pay attention and you still just blaze that path of like self-will forward, those dramas become a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. It's like it's testing your pain threshold. And you and I, like you more than me, but you have a huge pain threshold. Like you can suffer. Your whole thing is like the queen of suffering. Right. So it's going to have to get really bad before you're going to, have a reckoning with it.
And I think it has to get really bad, but I think it has to, if I look at my trajectory and I look, I have 20-year history with this, and that I could have probably white knuckled the rest of my life through it without seeking more help. And I think that there was a part of me thinking that I'm 35 years old, like I should be able to handle this on my own. That eating disorders are a young person's disease, that it's something that I was recognize I have a lot of the shoulds, that I should have, gotten over this when I was in college or the multiple times that I was in treatment beforehand. But it's just that kind of in the back of your mind, you're thinking like, there could be something more, like there could be a life more fulfilling and like more free if I go through this.
And the cutting and baffling aspect of it is this delusion that you can solve it yourself, that you can apply your self-will to this problem because it's worked in every other area of your life. Like, why can't I, make it work here?
Absolutely.
But the more you rely on, and like you told Shane Parrish, like you were talking about self-reliance, and it was in the context of not being an entitled person.
Yeah.
And I understand that, but I couldn't help but think you're advocating this path of like, you can only count on yourself. Right. And at the end of the day, people will come in and help you, but like, it's gotta be you. And I think that mentality is what keeps people who struggle with this or other forms of addiction stuck in their condition or their disease, because they're unwilling to raise their hand and ask for help and then accept that help.
Right. And I think that where the disconnect always happened to me, because I could look at, I knew what I needed to do. Like, and in terms of, rehabilitating my body, things like that, like, what you need to do. You could give me a meal plan. You could tell me probably what I needed to eat, or like, I knew what I needed to do, but forcing myself to do it on my own, I
wasn't going to happen.
Couldn't do it. And what happens when you realize you can't do it on your own, you then, or at least I started kicking myself and getting in this cycle of self-flagellation, saying, Amelia, you know what you need to do. Why can't you do it?
Right.
And for somebody who, yes, I have been super self-reliant in so many areas of my life, and to not be able to apply it to this is very devastating.
Yeah, it's called a shame spiral. Yeah. Right?
It's bad.
Yeah. Self-knowledge will avail you nothing, as they say. And what's relevant to that is I reached out to you, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago to like come on the podcast, and you kind of kept me at bay for a little bit. And then maybe a year ago, you're like, I want to come on. I have something I want to talk about. Like, I have this thing with eating. Right. But I'm not ready to talk about it yet. So that was a while ago. Yeah. You had the self-awareness, the self-understanding, but you weren't ready to, either own it yourself completely or do anything about it until recently. Yeah.
And that's very true, is that I knew, and I had spoken to you, that like, this is a part of me, but I don't feel like I'm in a place right now where I'm actually doing anything to kind of to make myself better. I didn't feel like I was in a place of recovery. And so I needed to kind of come to that point where I realized I can't do this on my own anymore. And I need to go into treatment. I need to seek a higher level of care, take myself out of my life. And to do that. And so that really was kind of the moment for me, in realizing like, yes, at one point I want to talk about this, but it can't, it's not now.
Yeah. And I was like, great, when you're ready, do it. But I didn't bug you about it. Like, you have to come to that, on your own terms. Like you have to arrive at that place where you have the willingness to address it. And then, later on, like, talk about it, but it has to be for you. Right. Yeah. I would imagine you've been foisted into treatment protocols in the past where you're just trying to get people off your back as opposed to really wanting it for your own life.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that's when I was much younger, that's the case. When you're 16 years old and you're thrown in the hospital, like that wasn't my doing. I was kicking and screaming the entire way. Or in college, I went through the motions to get people to just, so they wouldn't pull me out of school. And this time it was, no one was telling me like, you should seek treatment. And most people didn't even know. A few close friends knew. People from my past, clearly knew that I'd struggled in the past, but they didn't know that it was still bothering me. So this time I remember calling up my parents. I was like, I'm going to day treatment. I'm taking a leave of absence. And it was a very different place for me to do it all on my own. Without anybody else kind of like encouraging me.
They must have been happy about that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that clearly like they've seen me struggle for so long. And I actually realize now, being in my mid 30s and I'm not a parent, but I can't imagine how hard it is to watch your child go through that and to be like, but she needs to do it on her own,
Yeah. So the day that you decided you were going to go to treatment, was there something that triggered that, or was it just a slow awareness that one day you woke up and you're like, today's the day?
It was a slow awareness. It'd been kind of percolating in the back of my mind, probably for the past year or so. But I kept telling myself like, God, I don't really need it. And I remember it was actually in January, I called Opal Food and Body, which is a place in Seattle, to do kind of just an initial intake eval. And then I remember actually they were like, okay, this is great. You can come in. And then I was getting ready to prepare to run Barkley marathons. And I was like, no, things are going well. Like I want to run. I was like, we'll deal with this after Barkley, So I kept finding like, I kind of pushed them off. And then I finally, and then I ended up with another stress fracture, which took me out of Barkley. And that was 2 weeks before. And I called them up and I was like, yeah, let's do this. Now's the time,
Well, before I get into what that experience was like, I kind of want to track it back to the beginning. So as you said, this is something you've been living with since you were a very young girl.
Right.
It began with OCD, right? When you were like 6 or 7?
Yeah. I was diagnosed with OCD probably when I was 6 or 7. It wasn't your classic like light switch flipping type of cleanliness thing. And actually anybody who knows me now would laugh if they heard I was OCD because like I'm a very messy person. Yeah.
You don't have a Tracy Flick like desk?
No. Like it's just chaos. I'm very, very cluttered. So I didn't really fit that classic mold, but I remember, even when I was like 4 or 5 years old, if I couldn't get to sleep by a certain time, I would throw a tantrum. Or if I had these different like fears and phobias that would come and go. And so those kind of started pretty early on. And then I think that when the food issues started, I think my parents just kind of thought, and I kind of thought, well, it's just another manifestation of the OCD and it will go away in a few months, kind of like the other ones did. Yeah, it's a phase. That was just another manifestation because all the other ones kind of came and went. So this one will kind of come and go. So I think we didn't really think too much. I didn't really think too much of it. Yeah,
until you're like 16, right? When was the first big crisis?
Yeah, I try and think about when the first time when I had kind of like a disordered thought around food. And it was my sophomore year of high school, and it was a pretty short time frame from when I first started having like thoughts about food to, when I got really sick. But I remember being a sophomore and going to a sleepover at my friend Kelly's house, and we were all sitting around. Everyone was like eating popcorn. And I remember that night, all I could do was fixate on that, like feeling guilty about eating that greasy popcorn. And then the next morning, like still thinking about it and thinking about how I shouldn't have eaten that. And then I remember like going to my mom and being like, I can't stop thinking about that popcorn, and I don't know what's wrong with me. And so, and this had been kind of, I mean, this food stuff had kind of just been over a span of a few months. Where I think that I just got progressively more fearful of it. And I didn't really know why. It wasn't a conscious, I think now we think so much of eating disorders as like a, the body image thing. There was no body image involved for me at the time.
Control.
It was control. It was absolutely, I think I was, going through random teenage turmoil, and it was a way that I could feel kind of superior to people, is that I could control what I put in my body. And it was almost this weird little game for me. It was like I could go out and do, 3 soccer games on X amount of food, and everybody else had to eat more than me. And so it became this kind of fixation like that.
Yeah. You would think that impulse to create control in your life would come from, like a chaos related trauma in the household, like your parents split up or there's something happens where your life feels out of control. But this is the one thing that you can control. But the more I kind of learn about this world, it's not as simple as that. Like your parents love you, and it seems like you grew up in a pretty functional, healthy household. So when you look back on that time, like do you have any insights about what led to that impulse of needing to exert that kind of control?
The sad part is that I don't. And I guess it's not sad, but I remember being in recovery the first time when I was 16 and looking around thinking, almost feeling bad that I didn't have anything to blame. Like I didn't have a trauma. My parents were super supportive. We had very normal relationships with food growing up. There was never any diet talk. There was never anybody on a diet trying to lose weight. There was nothing that I could point to. And I think in a way that almost made it worse for me because I wanted a reason. I wanted something to be like, this is why I'm so messed up. But instead it was just like, I got it in my head that there must be something then wrong with me. That I could have this wonderful life, these wonderful parents, this functional family, yet there were these demons in my head and I didn't know why.
Right. It makes you feel broken and also guilty, like you're letting down these people who did right by you.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, my parents, it's the same thing. Like there was no alcoholism in my house growing up. My parents are still married. My needs were met and all of that. So it's confusing when you can't you're almost like, I wish that I could say it was this. And when you can't, it's like, it doesn't give you an anchor.
Right.
Or a genesis point for this kind of thing.
And you have nothing external to blame. And I think in some ways it's so much easier when you can point to something external and be like, that's it. Instead, you have to turn it all internal on yourself.
Right.
And that's been a pattern through my entire life, is that I will always find the internal blame first. I will never, I don't blame anybody else, but it's always me.
Yeah. I would imagine there is some, something that happened that you're unconscious of on some level. Like I had Gabor Mate on the podcast, and he flipped this equation on me and started psychoanalyzing me, and, asking me about my parents and all of that. And it's like, his thing is all of these things result from some form of childhood trauma by well-intentioned people that, we may not remember, or just some emotional need wasn't being met. And maybe like you're a hyper-competitive person. On some level, did you feel like you had to be successful? Was there something unsaid in the household, like where, being driven and upwardly mobile was just an expectation? Like, I don't know. I don't know, but I think it's worth asking and exploring that. But ultimately, whatever is there doesn't really provide you a roadmap for getting better and living your life, right? Like if you just focus on the solution, like you can go down that rabbit hole, but ultimately I don't know what dividend it pays.
No, and I agree that I'm sure that I've looked at all different avenues and things like that, but I don't think finding the reason behind your disorder or your choice of coping mechanisms is actually going to do any good. At the end of the day.
It's not functional.
No.
Right. All right. So one of the things that you've kind of always said is like, well, I wasn't really an athlete in high school, but that's not the full picture. Like you were until you developed these disordered behaviors, and then that kind of sidelined you from softball and basketball and golf and all these other sports that you were excelling at prior to that.
I was a very good athlete growing up, and I remember like being in like the local newspapers, like the fearsome pitcher, you know, that nobody wanted to face in softball. But yeah, I mean, I lost a lot of weight in a short period of time, and I got very, very weak. And I think that was part of the start of the demise of sports. And then that clearly led to treatment and led to hospitalization. And so, I was a good athlete. I just became too sick to be able to compete anymore.
So you have this experience where you're hospitalized between Thanksgiving and Christmas when you're 16, right? So that's your first experience with an institution.
Oh, God. I do not wish. And so, and this was back this was before there were any types of like residential treatments facilities, or like you see these nice houses that are like spa-like type of treatment facilities. No, this was a children's ward. Yeah. This was a children's ward at a hospital. And I was on bed rest for a month. So I couldn't get out of the hospital bed. And I mean, you try and tell a sophomore in high school that they can't like get out of bed, and wasn't allowed to see my friends. That I was completely cut off. I remember my parents actually snuck in 2 of my friends to come and see me. But they just tried, I think because they thought that friends would be triggering. I don't know. It was a different treatment models at the time.
Yeah. Well, your parents must have been terrified.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they didn't tell me until after I was discharged from the hospital, but the first night they took me in there, because I remember, so I went to a doctor, when I told my parents, you know, about my food issues, and the doctor like did a checkup, did all my vitals, and they're like, she needs to go to the hospital right now. That night in the hospital, my heart actually stopped, and my parents didn't tell me about that until after I was discharged, because I didn't know. But I mean, they almost lost their daughter. Yeah. And I think that still kind of pains me to this day. So.
Yeah. I mean, if your heart had stopped at home,
right.
It would have been a totally different thing. So you were really lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's scary, and it's for real. Right. And I think what's interesting about your story is that you're like, okay, well, now it's life back to normal. Like when you get back out, right? Like, okay, that happened, but yeah, I need some therapy, but it's all going to be fine now.
Right.
I mean, was that the kind of approach, or?
Yeah, I think that, so back in the day, they would kind of medically stabilize you at the hospital, and then you just went straight to kind of an outpatient therapy model. And at the time, I think that was fine for me. I was just eager to get back to high school. In my mind, I was kind of thinking like, okay, I went down a road that I didn't want to go down. I learned my lesson. I don't want to be in a hospital for another month or so. So we'll do this thing and we'll get over it and just move on. And it seemed to work, I think, for the most part, for a few years at least.
Well, you didn't get back into sports though.
You know, I did a little bit. Once I was kind of more stabilized, I was able to rejoin my teams, but it wasn't the same.
It wasn't, yeah.
I kind of lost a year of developmental time where everybody else is getting faster and getting better and getting stronger. And so I came back to the team, but I just kind of like rode the bench for the next
too far behind, had lost too much strength.
Yeah. And that's a bitter pill to swallow for sure.
Do you think that you transferred some of those impulses to control your environment onto your academics?
I think I had always had those control. I mean, the academics, that part, I was clearly always like the teacher's pet control kid from a very, very young age. My parents were always like, you can get B's and C's, it's fine. And I was like, no, straight A's for me solely. So, but yeah, that was there. As I kind of tamped down the sports, I also went more heavily into like singing and musical theater and things like that. But, So yeah, it just kind of manifested itself in other ways.
So, but you graduate with great grades. You go to college. You're an RA and you're doing a cappella and you're getting your summa cum laude and the whole thing.
Yeah.
Like, what was the college experience with this?
College, I did my freshman year. I did pretty well in terms of like I thought at that point I was recovered. I remember actually telling my sorority sisters like I recovered from an eating disorder.
ED, recovered, yes. In the past,
yes,
done.
In the past, recovered, done. And in the sophomore year, I relapsed really hard, really quickly once again. And
do you know what triggered that?
At the time, I think it was like some tumultuous relationships, but it was nothing very, I mean, it was all kind of, if I look back on it now, it was all kind of your typical young adult turmoil.
Right. But it probably was, if you weren't treating it consistently over the years, like it was just waiting in the shadows for an excuse to come back out again.
Exactly. And so once again, I kind of wish I had something to pinpoint on it, but I don't really.
It's your fault.
I know it is my fault.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I relapsed really hard my sophomore year of college, and then spent like the next 3 years just trying to get by. And I had multiple interventions from friends from my a cappella group trying to get me out of school.
So it was visibly apparent.
I was very, very sick.
So walk me through what it's like to be stuck in that cycle, because I think there's so many misconceptions and myths about the experience of being held captive by an eating disorder. I mean, people just think, well, just get over it. Like, start eating food.
Just eat, right? Oh my God, if it was only that simple. I'm like, thank you very much.
Yeah, that had not occurred to me.
Yeah. One of the biggest misconceptions, and I think people have reached out to me and said, like, I don't know how you were competing, not eating. And I go, okay, well, people with eating disorders eat. I mean, that's it's just always, it's a very, very controlled manner. And when it depends, I mean, my experience has solely been with anorexia. So I can't speak for bulimia, for binge eating disorder, for the other manifestations. But it is just, it's all consuming. Food is all consuming. And the thoughts of, how to eat it, how much, how not to eat it, how to avoid detection. And it is very much something that as you do get physically emaciated, your mental state also starts to deteriorate. And so part of me, I look back and I go, God, how did I graduate summa cum laude in my state,
So but the mental degradation part of it, I mean, what is that? Because there's also like a weird euphoria with it also. And that goes hand in hand with like the body dysmorphia. You look in the mirror and you see, something very different than what is objective truth.
Yeah. Well, I had a lot of shame, actually. Actually, I was very ashamed of what I looked like. I knew I was very sickly and I would try and hide it. So I was in college in St. Louis and in the winters, and I would like put on like 2 or 3 pairs of tights under my jeans to try and hide it from people because I was so ashamed. But I didn't like how I looked and I didn't like what I was doing, but I didn't know how to change it. And I think that's one of the things that so much of this is also habit. So when you start ingraining these kind of habits, and when you start avoiding something, for instance, then the more and more that you avoid it, the more fearful the more like
power it has.
Yeah. So the more you avoid food and restrict food, the more fearful you become of it, and it becomes this cycle, and you just can't get out of it. I mean, you can, but
I think that powerlessness is what people have a hard time wrapping their heads around.
Yeah. Like why can't you just sit there and eat the meal?
And your answer to that would be?
I mean, I can. If you sit down in front of me and you put a plate of food in front of me, like I absolutely can. But like the
What are the
thought
consequences of
Right.
like eating that meal? Like what, walk me through like what the emotional experience would be for you if you were like actually force fed something that you didn't want to eat when you're in that state.
I mean, it's anxiety that just goes through the roof. So, I mean, of not eating the food is the way to cope with the anxiety, is the way to tamp down the anxiety. But if you actually, went through the process, if I sat down to eat that entire meal, like heart palpitations the entire time, just like thinking, ruminating. And then afterwards you spend all your time ruminating about that food, about what you ate. And what's also interesting is that I love food. People also think that, people with eating disorders like don't like the taste of food or don't. No. I mean, that may be true. It's true for some folks, but like you literally at some point in treatment, I remember being like, it was almost like they gave me permission to eat. And I was so happy at the time because I didn't have an option. So it was almost like you have to eat this.
Relief.
It was almost like a relief to give that up.
Wow. Do you know this person, Eugenia Clooney?
No.
She's this young girl who's a YouTuber who developed a really large audience. And her eating disorder just became writ large. Like she just dwindled down into like a stick figure, and she was putting up all these videos and lots of teen girls are following her and people are like, you're going to die. Like, I mean, it's shocking when you see this young girl. And then she kind of disappeared for a while. And last week, this big YouTuber called Shane Dawson, he's like one of the biggest creators on the platform, made a little mini documentary where he went and visited her to like see how she was doing. And it's fascinating. He goes to her house and he sits down with her, and apparently she had just come out of some kind of treatment, and he's trying to engage her in what that was like and how she's doing. And he's, trying to say the right things, and he's deeply concerned about her. But it was clear to me that this is somebody who really hasn't fully owned what's going on. Like she's young and she couldn't even say that she had an eating disorder, and she's wearing a big sweater. And it was clear that she was still, either very early in her recovery or still not even, not really in recovery at all. And if you watch it with an objective eye, it's like an hour-long video on YouTube. I'll put a link in the show notes. You can see the disease like written all over her face and how baffling it is because she's just not really connecting the dots.
Yeah. And I think that, and it's very, I mean, I look back at times when like I wasn't, connecting the dots. And I think that when you're very, very sick, sometimes it's hard to, and you can't see objectively, and you can't trust your own eyes. You can't trust yourself. And I stopped trusting my body. I stopped trusting everything. And that's a very paralyzing place to be. And that you just don't feel like you have a way out at all.
And yet you perpetuated this for quite some time, like through law school as well. Like you had some dark experiences in law school.
Yeah, law school was, so I graduated from college, and in college I kind of realized, okay, I something needs to be done. And so I graduated from college, got in my car with my mom and drove cross country to a residential treatment facility down in Carlsbad. And then I was there for a little bit. And actually that was the first time where I think I finally embraced, like fully surrendered. Like I outed myself on everything that I had been doing to kind of lie and steal and cheat my way through, pseudo eating disorder recovery. So I actually kind of got myself in like a good, solid state before I went to law school, but probably coming straight out of residential treatment into law school was not a great idea because as you know, law school is a pressure cooker.
Yeah. And, how long was that treatment experience?
I was there, I think about 5 weeks. I was supposed to be there about 8 weeks, but I think I only ended up being 5 because insurance ran out.
Right.
It's like these treatment facilities are like $1,200 a day.
Yeah.
So,
it's all about like the aftercare. Like what's your program going to be when you get out of this?
Right.
And if you don't have that set up and you're not making that your number one priority, again, you're going to revert back.
Yeah. And so I set up a team in Seattle where I was in law school, but it was still very much, the chaos of being a 1L and then the whole, like, your 1L grades count for everything. And I almost dropped out of law school like 3 or 4 times. Probably the first and only time in my life that I've ever identified as being depressed, So it was a very tough, very, very tough transition. Mm-hmm. Highly would not recommend that.
And was there no exercise going on during these years?
Yeah. So the treatment model at the time, and probably for good reason, was that, or this was the thinking at the time, was that you need to eliminate all movement. And I was also at a physical state where it would be unsafe for me. Uh-huh. And so I would say, between I graduated between like my freshman year of college through probably my second year of law school, I didn't do any type of exercise. None.
Wow.
But I was a mover. I've always been a mover my entire life, like I like to move and I like to be active. So I wanted to figure out how to go back to that. But for some people, part of their disorder is movement, is exercise. Yeah. And I was fearful that it could be a slippery slope for me.
Yeah. Yeah. The real problem is the underlying sense of uneasiness that drives you to feel like you have to control your environment.
Yeah.
That can be manifest in your relationship with food, but it can be also manifest in your relationship with exercise or your studies, your academics, like your job, like all of these different things are outlets for that, sort of ill-conceived compulsion that you have. Like the food thing is just how it manifests for you.
Right.
It can be alcohol, it can be drugs, it can be gambling, shopping, whatever. And when you kind of address the relationship with food, it doesn't necessarily, like, you may be kind of white knuckling it, but if you still have that, it's going to find another way to eke out. Right. And it's interesting how you see so many people in recovery in the ultra world. There's a reason for that.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like the percentage has to be crazy high.
It's super high. And I think, but the problem is that when it comes to, for somebody who's in recovery for drugs and alcohol, for instance, or for sex addiction, they would say, well, exercise is a healthy outlet for you. For somebody who's in recovery for an eating disorder, all of a sudden
those two
you have to question,
overlap.
Is exercise a healthy outlet for you? And that's actually a lot of the work that I did when I was at Opal, was to try and untangle, because I had a lot of questions in my mind too, of whether the running, and whether the athletics was part of the disorder.
Right.
And to try and decouple those.
Yeah. That's so hard because you love the sports, right? And this is making your life better in so many ways. So to objectively kind of deconstruct the extent to which it's contributing to your disorder is not only difficult, but it has to be, like, if you come to the conclusion that, yes, there is a disordered aspect to this, then you have to be prepared to dismantle this identity that you've constructed about who you are.
Absolutely. And that whole like feeling of grief and loss that goes with that. Though I do have to say, I think having so many injuries, I've kind of have gone through that grief and loss in a separate.
Yeah.
I actually, I said this to my treatment team, and that actually one of the best things in terms of separating the eating disorder from sport was being sidelined with injury, because I all of a sudden then had to it was like a forced separation.
You had to reckon with it.
Right. I had to reckon with figuring out, like, who am I beyond this? And then also, like, is this part of it, or is it, is this a good, healthy outlet for me, or is it something that's driven, by disorder?
Yeah. So. Yeah. And I would imagine that your answer to that is constantly evolving now. Right. Yeah. Because I don't know. Through my own lens and my own experience, when people say to me like, oh, you transferred one addiction for another, I'm like, yeah, I can't, to a certain extent, that is true. Like, I think people who dismiss that out of hand are not being intellectually or emotionally honest. So I'm always monitoring that. Like, what is my relationship to this? Is it healthy? Is it unhealthy? And it's always a little bit of both, I think. Yeah. But in the balance of things, it's improving my life more than it's denigrating it.
Yeah. And I think that what I've kind of realized, and clearly I still question this all the time, but you have to look at your intentions behind the movement and intentions behind what you're doing. And I've realized that there are certain forms of exercise that could be more disordered, that aren't as like healthy, and then for my mental state. And then that's also part of the reason why I kind of moved from like the obstacle racing over like into the more endurance side of things, is realizing that the competitive obstacle racing like circuit for me could be very unhealthy if I got caught up solely in the competition, solely in the podium, solely in things like that. Whereas then if I looked at things like doing the Barkley marathons, that where your chance of failure is 99.999%.
It's you and you.
Yeah. That to me was coming from a very different place than the circuit, the Spartan racing circuit, things like that.
Yeah, that's about winning, right? And other people and competition. And the ultra world is really like these soul explorations. Yeah, in certain respects. I mean, you want to win, you're competitive or whatever, but like, it's ultimately not about anyone else other than your relationship with yourself. Yeah. And there's something about those training for those races and participating in them that forces you to confront yourself in a really kind of profound way that probably doesn't happen in a more compressed kind of competitive event.
Yeah. And it's actually one of the reasons when I first started getting into sport, I mean, I was 27, 28, that I shied away from races that were actually like timed and ranked and judged and had placements. I started out doing Tough Mudders solely because there was no competitive aspect to it, because I knew that could be a dangerous path for me.
And then look what happened.
I know. Well, look what happened. Yeah. And then and the things that then came along with that.
Well, it's amazing because you became a prisoner of your own success. Like you became so wildly successful in a manner in which I would imagine you couldn't have ever expected. But then with that comes shouldering the expectations of suddenly all these other people and sponsors and the media who are like, you're the queen of pain and like you're the hardest person, and you're so the expectation is like you're going to win all these races, you're going to beat all the men, you're going to kick everyone's ass, and you're going to suffer more. And so when you line up for every race, like just, okay, like I have to like, dance for everybody else once again, like it's an unsustainable model. And I think going back to that first experience of meeting you and having this sense of who you are at that time, like I've watched you evolve from that person. Like when I first started really getting interested in what you were doing, it's like, oh yeah, she's kicking ass in all these races. But like, I was like, all right, she's a badass. But then when you pivoted to realizing that you had to find a way to bring joy into it for yourself and like release the pressure, that pressure valve, that's when I was like, and you started writing about it and I was like, oh, now I'm really interested in what you have to say. And that's where I think, everything that you've done and undergone that you're experiencing right now is a result of like what happened with that, right? So it was almost like that pressure valve became too much. You were compelled to like figure out how to have a different relationship with yourself in sport that then kind of catapulted you on this trajectory of personal growth that, is sort of culminating now in everything that you're doing and talking about.
Yeah, I think it is kind of, it was a piecemeal process. I think that kind of set me up in taking a step back and saying, okay, like I need to reformulate my relationship with sport was kind of the first step to then ending up reformulating my relationship with myself. And it was just that the sport aspect was easier to address than, the fundamental, the eating disorder part of it. So I kind of started there. Yeah. But it is very, it's so, I wish that I could segment them and say that they're not related, but they're completely related.
Of course they're related.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So. All right. So somehow you get through law school, and then you end up in Chicago at Skadden.
Yes. Didn't you worked at Skadden, didn't you?
Not as a lawyer. I was a legal assistant in the New York Skadden office right out of college before law school.
Oh, that's...
And now I think,
and you still went to law school?
I know, that's what everyone says, and that's what I ask. This is how disconnected from myself I was. Like I was the world's worst paralegal. That place was so huge that I could just hide in my office and like avoid the phone and like pretty much get away with not doing anything. And I became my skill set was like avoiding work.
That's amazing. I actually knew some associates like that too.
I worked there for 2 years and I had a whole crew of like young, right out of college friends. Yeah. And we would run around the city. And so I had a great time, and it's not totally fair. Like I did my job or whatever, but it wasn't exactly a fulfilling, environment. And I'm like, man, I can't believe I just went to law school because I thought that's what you're supposed to do. And I didn't really occur to me to even explore doing anything else. But I was there 1989 to 91. Like it was like in the middle of like crazy M&A boom. Oh, yeah. And that place was like on fire.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I can't imagine like being a lawyer there.
Yeah, I know. I was in the Chicago office, which I think that helped a little. We were not as crazy as I think just the New York culture for law firms is really, really tough. Chicago, you get a little bit more of the Midwestern vibe and whatnot. I actually loved being at a firm. I actually really, really enjoyed my time at Skadden. So I graduated in 2009. So basically right after everything, Bear Stearns had collapsed, Lehman's had collapsed. And so I went into restructuring and bankruptcy. So we were very busy, but it was kind of like boomer bust.
Business is good.
Business is good, right? Yeah. It's kind of like, the Schadenfreude of all of that. But I actually really enjoyed it. I think for me, I saw partners and I was like, that's not what I want to do, you know?
But how long were you at Skadden?
6 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So that was, you stayed another year or two and that's the partner deal.
Well, oh God, I know Skadden's a single tier partnership, so it's more like 11 or 12. Oh, okay. But I think I really like in legal work, I really like being in the weeds and I really like kind of the drafting and the process and things like that. And then I realized like, as you get older, you look at partners, all their time is spent like the schmoozing, the business, not all the time, but schmoozing, business development. And that I wanted to do like the grit work.
See, I would have preferred the other way around.
Network. I was that person that
somebody else do all that work. Like, you can go lock yourself in that conference room and go through like 300 boxes of documents. Yeah. I'll go out to dinner with the client.
Networking events, I would find any excuse to avoid them. So I was like, that's not for me. But
and this is the period of time in which you reconnect with being an athlete and you have all this success. And I remember just reading about you and kind of watching this whole thing unfold and thinking like, you're winning every race that you're in, and you're working like I know and appreciate like the pressure cooker environment in which you're practicing law. And I just kept thinking like, she's one of the few people that could actually make a living as a professional athlete and define, a new way of being a professional athlete and like leave the law and like do this full time. The law is always going to be there. You can go back to these law firms. And I was confused as to why you like having both.
Yeah. I could technically have made a living as as a, professional obstacle racer. But for me, it would have changed the character of what I did. I mean, if I thought I put enough pressure on myself to go out and win world championships when I knew that I could go back to my law job, that if I didn't win the world championship, it didn't mean that I wasn't going to be able to eat the next day. So in my mind, if I made it my profession, it would change the character of what I was doing, which is already a very tenuous relationship. I mean, if the competition was getting to me and I'm just like your ultimate weekend warrior, imagine if that was my livelihood. So it was a place for me of being like, nope, going to try and still keep that joy in there, which, had its ups and downs. You
still had to meet your maker with it, even though you kept your job.
I know. So I don't know had I decided to quit and become, a professional obstacle racer. But this is also at the very, very early stages that I got in the sport, before anybody would even call it a sport. And today, some people still won't call it a sport. So,
but it's blown up. I mean,
has.
It's a huge thing. And you definitely could have stepped out and made a career outside of the law. You made that choice.
Yeah, but I never actually seriously considered it, beyond just kind of brief moments here or there of being like, well, could I? And I said, yeah, but I'm already almost 30 years old. Who becomes a professional athlete when they're 30 years old?
You do.
I was going to say, I was like, some people.
Were there ever moments though where you're getting ready, it's Thursday or Friday afternoon and you've got world championships that weekend or some big race where the partner calls and says, hey, we're all meeting, tomorrow, Saturday morning at the firm in the conference room. You had to call it off. Because that's the way that works.
Yeah. I did skip a lot of races last minute. I always booked flights refundable because because I didn't know. Never happened around a world championship. Those I actually did make sure that I took vacation time, even though we know that doesn't necessarily always mean that you're protected. I remember I would be, drafting or sending out emails at 10 p.m. the night before a race. That's just part of it. Or I would finish the race and then go check my email and be like, please, nobody emailed me while I was out. And they're like, why aren't you responding? This was, I think I still had BlackBerry at that time.
Mud.
I know.
You just crawled out of a mud pile after carrying a log through a lake or something.
And I'd be like, I'm sorry, we didn't have any and that was the issue. A lot of these races, there's no cell phone service at a lot of these venues. In the middle of nowhere. So then I'm sitting there thinking like, oh my God, am I getting emailed from somebody
that creates more anxiety than just checking it.
Yeah.
And what was the food relationship like when you were competing and at your best and during this phase?
I think that I was kind of rationalizing everything that I was doing in terms of eating as I'm performing well. So it doesn't really, matter. I was like, I'm doing well. So what I'm eating must be okay.
Yeah. And doing well is an understatement. I mean, you're on the cover of all these magazines and you're getting all this attention. Like the accolades are just raining down upon you. So I would imagine that's disorienting when it comes to really taking honest stock and inventory of your behavior.
Yeah. And I think that to be totally honest, my eating habits have probably been very similar through the entire time. Mm-hmm. It's just that
it took that many years for it to catch up to you.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. I mean, that's what I've said. It was like, you can delude yourself in your mind for so long that you are doing fine, but the body doesn't forget as easily. And, after a while it starts to catch up. And I think I also probably didn't realize at this point, that I was not getting periods and that my bones were deteriorating and things like that. And so it became after a while, your body will break.
Yeah. Well, you were diagnosed with osteoporosis when you were in high school, right?
Yeah. So when I was 16, I think they did a DEXA and, all the Z scores at the time. They don't call it osteoporosis at the age. They call it osteopenia. But so I was diagnosed with that when I was 16. I had another one done when I was in my early 20s and it had gotten better. And so I think that they were like, okay, it can reverse and increase from there. But I did know, I have a history of this and I broke a lot of bones when I was even a little kid because I have a small bone frame.
Right. So you're coming off this, streak of just winning all these races, and then suddenly injuries start to appear.
Right.
I mean, is that how it kind of begins? Well, first there's the sort of reconciling with the pressure.
Yeah. Well, where was the timeline? So what happened was that I basically at the end of 2015, I had just won like my third World's Toughest Mudder. And I remember I was ready to walk away. Like I was ready to walk away from the sport just because I just felt overwhelmed by the pressure. And I almost thought like, maybe I should just go out on top, like won these titles and just sail off into the sunset. And I think I was kind of just tired of the circuit. And then I actually discovered ultra running, or I thought about that to give it a go. At this point, this was when I left Skadden, moved cross country to go to Apple.
What was that decision about?
That decision was, I think in my mind, it was partially to have a better lifestyle more suited to competing, in terms of that I worked actually just as much now as I probably did at the firm, but it was just it's on a more regular type of like hourly, the in-house lifestyle, a little bit more conducive. Also, I knew I wasn't going to be a partner. I was pretty middle of the road associate and was not on my radar.
It's not freezing cold.
Yeah. And then I also wanted to get back west. I could get back out west because I'm born and raised in Portland. Yeah. And so that was part of all that went into it. And I remember coming out to California and seeing like the beautiful trails, the trailhead like 10 minutes from the Apple campus and being like, yep, there I am. And so I started targeting ultras, and I ran Sean O'Brien down here, the 100K in 2016, got a golden ticket to go to Western States. And I was like, woo, started training a bunch more, knew nothing about how you should like increase running.
No coach, right?
No coach.
Yeah. You're so smart. What's wrong with you?
I know. No coach. Well, because with obstacle racing, the vast majority of my training was actually CrossFit. And then I ran maybe like 15 to 20 miles a week, but it was nothing. And then I look actually at my training log, because I did kind of keep one. And I went from running 15 to 20 miles a week to then prepping for Western States and running like 80, 90 miles a week in like 2 months. Yeah. So that's when I broke my femur.
Yeah.
So that was the first injury.
Maybe anyone would have broken their femur.
And I think that the femoral stress fracture I was able to write off as kind of like the training was not dialed in. And so with one bone injury, you can probably do that. But when they start to pile up, it's no longer that.
So you have this femoral fracture, which is no small thing, but it's impossible to get you to sit down for 5 minutes. No. Like you're just doing all kinds of crazy training around it.
Yeah.
Like 8 mile crutches, hikes and whatever.
Well, the funny thing is that, and people talk about that Spartan race that I did on crutches, and that had nothing. That was mainly for, I still am glad that I did that, because that was for like the adaptive athletes and seeing a different experience. That wasn't about trying to race. But yeah, I mean, as soon as I was cleared to do anything, which was literally the day after I got the diagnosis, I was in the pool with a pool buoy between my legs, trying to swim, trying to do anything that I could to like still be an athlete. And I think also at this time, all of a sudden, I had been managing my eating disorder, but then I was then looking at 4 months of no running, and I didn't know how to feed myself.
Right, because part of managing your eating disorder meant an exercise routine, right? Like, your calculus about what to eat is very much informed by how much you're training. Right. And when you're benched, suddenly that equation gets thrown out the window, and you got to figure out a different way of dealing with it.
Yeah. But I think that I go, well, so many of my other athlete friends have that exact same feeling too, when they all of a sudden are injured and they go, I don't know how to eat, or like I should probably stop eating as much. And so for me, I sat there and thought, okay, well, that's just normal. That's not an eating disorder. They don't have eating disorders. So does that mean I have an eating disorder? So I was part of that rationalization
It's
too.
hilarious that you're confused about asking yourself that question, though.
Well, I said, well, I mean, I did have an eating disorder, but is this part of it now? And I think that that's really hard to untangle a lot.
Yeah. So it becomes indelibly clear, though, when you suffer the second fracture, right? Like when you finally are able to kind of train again and then you fracture your sacrum.
Yeah. I mean, the femur stress fracture was hard for me because I was trying to do everything I could to stay in shape and to get back for world championships. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I dropped a lot of weight when I was injured, it was not intentional. And I think a lot of it, I also am a body type that, and I've realized this too, is that when I run, my body gets larger. I put on muscle and things like that and I build it really easily. But yeah. And so I dropped a lot of weight and then ended up with a sacral stress fracture, which was clearly like sacral stress fractures can be training errors, but they're generally like there's something going on in your body that's not right. And that was when I kind of started to think like, this is getting out of control again. Because also what happens is when you start to like lose weight, you can also then unintentionally get back into like the mental state that there's all this research about set points and people in their set points. And that when you go into like a starved state, you're like the obsessions become that much worse. Are you aware of the Key study?
I don't think so.
Okay. So back in the 40s, it was the Minnesota starvation experiment where they basically took, a group of healthy adult men and they starved them. And you can't do this nowadays because, clearly there's a lot of reasons.
There's a constitutional amendment.
Right. Exactly. But these men volunteered to be housed and basically I can't remember how much food they gave them, but it was so minimal. And they started exhibiting all of the traits that you see people with eating disorders.
Oh, wow. They could actually provoke it in people.
You can provoke it if you starve people down. And I think they saw very much, because the point of the study was actually to figure out what was going on in like the Nazi concentration camps. But it's still to this day one of the best studies and the only really study that we have about the effects of starvation on people and what that does to their mental state.
So what is that specifically? Like what they become more body dysmorphic or more like fearful of food? Yeah.
So the more that you actually like withhold food from people, then they will become fearful or they'll start hoarding it. They'll start rationing it. So you see with a lot of people with eating disorders that they may take a very long time to eat a meal or something. So these men would be like, well, I only get this amount of calories a day, so I will stretch it out. They would start obsessing over cookbooks, recipes. Nowadays you probably see this on like Instagram, people looking at food porn. And they would, just by not feeding your body, then all of those things became so much worse.
Right.
And it's funny that actually the first few weeks the first week that I was there at Opal, and I remember finally like I was full, like really full. And I go, what's funny? I've stopped obsessing over food because I'm not hungry. When you're fucking hungry, like you obsess over everything. It's amazing that when you actually feed yourself, the thoughts go away.
That goes away.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
But it's not as simple as that. But yeah. So it's interesting what actually just the physical starvation will do to your mind. And it doesn't have to be, when people think starvation, they think zero food, but it would
be interesting to apply a similar study to what goes on neurologically during intermittent fasting or these 7-day fast, because it's so the rage right now.
Yeah.
And are we having the real conversation that we need to have around this? Like, you'll hear a lot of anecdotal evidence that, oh, I'm more mentally focused, or, I can pay attention better. But what is happening hormonally and neurologically that's contributing to that? And how much of that is healthy versus, leading you towards that, disordered relationship with food? Well,
and I think that the more that you see people do that then with like their cheat days, and then they just go like hog, they'll restrict their food intake, and then just like one day a week go hog wild, and then go back to, so it's just this
I don't understand
cycle.
That at all.
And, and I think that it's tough because I don't think diets and things like that cause eating disorders. But if you have a predisposition to that kind of stuff, that's clearly not helping. And we're taught so much that we should not listen to our hunger cues, or that we should, we do anything to like suppress our appetites. Like, when did having an appetite become a bad thing? Yeah. There's so much about the culture right now that's tough.
And I think with the, the diet wars that we're seeing, or the way that people talk about diet on social media and on YouTube, et cetera, it's easy for people with disordered eating proclivities to hide behind whatever protocol they're advocating, whether it's vegan or paleo or keto or, fat, whatever it is. You can kind of you see people who you can kind of tell, like, this person has a fucked up relationship with food.
Right.
And they're there just, like singing from the rafters about how great a certain diet is.
Yeah.
But beneath that is an unhealthy obsession, like this obsessive kind of thing that's driving the whole machine.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's a fair number of studies that show that if you forbid certain things in your life, you're seriously going to then clearly crave it more and more. And so the people who say,
you have to make it evil.
Right. Exactly. And or you can only eat between X periods of time, and we are creating this machine. And it's really just this the thing is, and now it's not even, people say it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle change. And I'm like, no, that's still diet culture, just under a different,
Yeah, that's a good point.
And if you look at it, so many of these diets are consumers selling products. They're selling things to us.
It's amazing when a new kind of diet comes on, online, then how quickly the marketplace comes in to like fill it with all of these products, and it becomes like co-opted and packaged in a certain way, and then marketed and sold to us.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at now, everything on the shelves is keto this, keto that, and it's no different than growing up in the 90s. It was low fat, fat-free everything. Yeah. I think that's really hard for people to kind of like sort through a lot of the times.
Especially when we have to eat. Yeah. Like, I can just not drink or do drugs. And it's, obviously this is elementary, but like, you have to eat every day.
Yeah.
So you're forced to confront your condition in the most, tactile way 3 times a day at least.
Yeah. And it's what's interesting. And I've told you that, I have a history of going to AA, OA, because back, 10, 15 years ago, a lot of people treated eating disorders like an addiction, because that was a, model that we had, that the AA model worked very well. I remember going to a lot of AA, OA meetings during college or during law school, and thinking like, man, this OA thing doesn't seem to be working well for anyone. And I think because there's AA works great, because you guys you can be with other people and be around alcohol and things like that. Doesn't work for food, because you have to eat to live, And so it's not as simple as just avoiding it. And a lot of the mindset has gone away from treating food like an addiction, that it can't be treated like an addiction. And so I don't know. The science is still morphing on it and the treatment models, but
yeah, I mean, I don't suffer from that condition, and you know, I don't have a scientific opinion on it, but I think that if there is a disease aspect to it, it's not the food, it's the impulse to control, like we were talking about before. And 12-step, whether it's OA or AA, is all about like getting you to, you know, turn your gaze inward and do an inventory of how you're behaving, to get clarity on who you are and like make amends and, you know, be able to get, you know, clear on what your character defects are, and then have this community that holds you accountable.
Yeah. And it was actually kind of sad for me when I remember looking back into treatment, you know, 2 or 3 years ago, because I loved the 12-step culture and I found it very, very helpful for me, and being like, wait, no one's really doing that for eating disorders anymore.
I have friends that are in OA.
Yeah.
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 It seems to do. I mean, I have some friends that have been in for a long time. They find it to be helpful. I've never been to an OA meeting, but, you know, a lot of them are people who are cross-addicted. Like they're people that I know from AA. They just go to both. You know, it's all the same thing. Like the more I kind of, you know, live on earth, I start to see all of these things as one thing, and something that every single human being, you know, can identify themselves on a spectrum. Like we're all guilty of behaviors or thought patterns, activities, substances, whatever it is that we compulsively do on some level. Maybe it's minor for a lot of people, but that we can't seem to stop ourselves from doing, even though we're suffering adverse consequences. Like, hey, why are you constantly dating assholes? Or, you know what I mean? Like, whatever, you know, why do you have to go to the mall 3 times a week? Or why are you watching soap operas at 11 a.m.? Like, all of us, you know, have our little vices. And, you know, in certain respects, the person who, you know, can't pull the needle out of their arm is the easy case, because the problem is so easy to diagnose and treat. Whereas food, it's harder, you know, the relationship thing, it's even hard. It's like, it's really hard to like deconstruct what the actual problem is. But I think they're all manifestations of something very similar that we all share just in being human.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I've realized with the number of people that have reached out to me, you know, after I, you know, opened up about this, a lot of people would start an email saying like, I don't have an eating disorder, but I have X, Y, and Z, or I've struggled with X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, it doesn't, you know, food was my coping mechanism. We all have a coping mechanism. You know, if food was that for me. And so, but it's underneath, it's all the same language, you know? And then a part of me, and then I get in my mind and I'm like, why? Like, then why are we, I mean, and like, what is it about the human condition then that like we're all currently in this day and age, it seems that everybody seems to be struggling with these something underlying these. You know, what's the solution?
Know. Maybe life's just too easy and comfortable.
I think so too. You talk about people talk about that's why, you know, why ultra marathons and everything.
This is why this whole world exists.
Yeah. People have to figure out how to inflict some pain on themselves. And I'm part and parcel of that.
To feel alive.
I know.
You know?
Right.
Well, you've had, you know, your journey through this from super competitive to finding joy in it. And now this, you know, like latest chapter, first I want to get into like what actually happened at Opal. So you go to the treatment center. Like, what is the experience? Like, what is the protocol of trying to understand how to, you know, resolve this issue and get you on a better path?
Yeah. I mean, every treatment facility is a little bit different. So I was in a day patient. So it was like 8 to 6 p.m. And then you do all your meals and your snacks there. And it really is 10 hours a day of talking about your feelings, which I actually think is incredible.
It's awesome.
Here is how I think the world, this is how I think the world is going to be a better place. Everybody needs to go talk about their feelings for 10 hours a day.
Everybody should go to treatment.
I know.
Treatment's the best.
Like, anybody can benefit from treatment.
You get to like opt out of your life and just go to this place, and all you do is work on yourself.
Yeah.
The whole time.
It is, but I think that what I needed to do was I had to create space for myself to finally actually confront everything. And, you know, the first few days, I remember kicking and screaming. I remember calling up my parents, calling my friends, being like, no, this place not for me.
They let you use the phone?
Need this. Yeah. Well, so it wasn't, I stayed with my sister. Okay. So it was 8 to 6 p.m. And then I had,
I see.
I slept at home.
I was wondering, because you were like posting on social media throughout. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't, some people got mad at me that I didn't clarify that I wasn't in a residential or inpatient facility. But
you owe them an explanation.
Right. But I was like, I didn't want to spend my time being like, this is a partial hospitalization program and it's, it's 50 hours a week. But yeah, so I didn't warrant the inpatient level of treatment. But I think that a lot of what they used at Opal and a treatment modality is radically open dialectical behavioral therapy, which is for people with diseases of over control, which really spoke to me because everything in my life has been about that over control piece. And then just trying to take a step back, and when you strip away all of your coping mechanisms, so you strip away the ability to control food. I stripped away, the exercise sport piece, which, I'd kind of done the work on the exercise sport piece through injury and through rediscovering joy. And then all of a sudden you're sitting there and you're looking at yourself and you're like, okay, now this is me. Like I've gotten rid of my coping mechanisms, and you kind of like, you feel very, very raw. And, I'm sure you can relate to that.
Super vulnerable. What about the illusion that you're in control at all?
Yeah.
Let's start there.
Yeah.
The whole impulse to control is actually just a fabrication.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, you can control what you put in your mouth, but you're not really in control of anything.
No, it's controlling you.
Decoupling that relationship is like the big puzzle piece.
Yeah.
I think. And really just embracing the fact that you're not in control.
No.
And that the path to healing is about letting go and surrender.
Yeah.
Which for a type A personality who's holding on to everything and is trying to will their way in the world, that's like telling somebody that you have to, just wave the flag of defeat. Mm-hmm. So it's a very difficult pill to swallow and to really just even grok.
Yeah. And it's so humbling too, because for the first few days there, I'm like, wait, I can't go to the bathroom by myself. Somebody has to go to the bathroom and flush the toilet.
Yeah. You're in a mental institution.
Right. And that and there is so much I just fully surrender. And it is something that is so humbling in so many ways. And I think that's you get that fight or flight response. And after that first week, I was almost like, I'm packing up. I don't need this. Packing up, going back down to San Jose. But I'm so glad I stuck through it. And then by the end of my time there, I was almost like, no, I don't want to go. I just want to talk about my feelings.
Yeah.
This is
then
so
it gets
great.
scary to go back into the world.
Yeah, it does. And I think that
I have
was
to make my own decisions.
That was part of my thinking. It was actually part of the things that kept me out of treatment, I think, for a while, and seeking treatment, because I was afraid that, or I'd seen stories of people who almost there's just a revolving door of treatment facilities, because then you don't know anything else, because the big bad world is scary out there. Well, it would be great if we could all sit around and talk about my feelings for 10 hours a day, but that's not how life is. Yeah. So it's almost not staying there too long at the same time.
So what is the protocol now? How do you make sure, because you've been in, treatment centers before and have seen what has happened when you haven't had active, aftercare and, really made your recovery a life priority.
Yeah. I think that's the greatest unknown. And that's, so I set up as much guardrails and support as I could coming back here. I started work initially part-time, and then I was still doing more an intensive outpatient. So I was kind of doing the two, and then you slowly step down. And then right now I have kind of an outpatient team, and then really just setting up a support network. And for me, I have a great support network, but it's making sure that I actually use it and actually reaching out and saying hey, I need help. And this thing that we talked a lot about at treatment is outing yourself and just saying like, hey guys, I have to out myself right now. I'm having really bad disordered thoughts and I just need to tell somebody and put it out there, because when I put it out there, then it doesn't hold as much power over me.
Yeah, and you have to do that in real time when it's occurring, because the tricky thing is when that moment arises, when you're, staring at a plate of food and you're thinking about like not eating it, or it's too late. Like then they're like, call somebody, but that train left the station a long time ago, maybe months ago. Like it's about the daily habit of checking in with people and people who know you and can monitor like, hey, you're a little off today. What's going on? And kind of compelling you to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. It's having that support system and network. And really for me, fully owning that there are some things that I can't be completely self-reliant on right now, and that's a bitter pill to swallow for somebody who likes to be fully self-reliant. But there have been times in coming back to the Bay Area and coming back to work where I realized like I need to set up dinners with folks right now to like go out and eat with them, because it's better. I do much better in like a social scenario than when I'm by myself,
Right. Well, now you're publicly on the hook.
I know. Well, and so now I have the entire world as accountability.
I know, right?
So it's a double-edged sword, because I did have some people reach out to me and say, oh, well, now everybody's watching you. You can't screw up. And all of a sudden my heart was like, oh my God, I'm like, I'm human. I'm going to screw up.
Yeah.
I've screwed up. Like we're all going to have screw ups. And I think it's, with alcohol or drugs, it's very easy to name your screw ups, because it's like, I did the substance or I didn't do the substance. Food, it's very, very slippery.
Yeah, it's not binary.
No, it's like, did I restrict that meal a little, or am I really eating to hunger? So
you got to really be in touch with yourself and be willing to have that kind of honest dialogue going on all the time. Like it's about your intentions as much as anything else, right?
Right.
But the authenticity and the vulnerability with which you kind of have offered this up to the world, I think is honorable and super courageous. And I don't say that in a perfunctory or light way. Like it was, I know it was a move that like you had a lot of consternation about. Like, should I talk publicly about this? You don't have to. You have no obligation to. You made that decision. I was on the I went to the website for Opal because I wanted to see what this organization is about, and they had there's like a slogan on the homepage that is beauty in imperfection and authenticity. Yeah. And that's lovely, right? Absolutely. Because we're all imperfect. And I think the path towards being that fully integrated person who's not living with that kind of dissonance requires, the courage to be authentic in real time, and to be human and to be, exposed on some level. And, I can't imagine what it felt like after you wrote that blog post and you hit, publish on it. Like, walk me through that.
It was actually the most freeing experience that I've ever had. I sat down and I bawled my eyes out for the next half an hour or so. As you
were writing it, or after you published it?
After I published it.
Yeah,
I mean,
just the catharsis.
The catharsis. Because I had been writing it, over like a span of since, I left treatment at the end of June. And then so it took me like a few weeks to kind of wrap my brain around it. I was so anxious. I remember that day before I was going to publish it. It was all done. It was sitting. It was ready to go. And I remember actually going to the pool to swim that morning, and then just it was like the best swim of my life, because it was just like anxiety or something like that. I don't know, fueled. But in putting it out there, it finally, I cried, because it was just, I finally felt true to myself.
Mm-hmm. And what was the motivation behind doing that?
Honestly, a lot of it, I hate to say that there was a selfish motivation, because it was almost an alignment for myself.
Yeah.
People were like, "Oh, you're so great. You're inspiring other people." And I'm like, That's
no,
great.
the discomfort of living in that kind of dissonance becomes intolerable.
Exactly. Yeah. And I can't say why exactly I felt the need to out it to the entire world as opposed to just, because I understand there are portions of yourself that you can keep close, in hand. You don't have to let everybody know your dirty laundry. But for me, it was very important to have that be a part of my story, considering I've been so open and vulnerable about many other things, but not this. Mm-hmm. And then that kind of selectiveness didn't sit well with me.
Right.
And just to be able to feel free. I felt very, very free after I published it. Uh-huh. And I went for a run the next day, and I was the most just free feeling. And then people started giving me negative feedback, and then that went away. No,
well, I mean,
the initial 24 hours was great.
I don't know. I'm sure, well, look, first of all, shame can't survive the light, right? So whatever shame you were harboring, the only way out of that is to do exactly what you did. And I'm sure there's trolls out there or whatever, but all I saw was this overwhelming outpouring of love and support. Absolutely. It was huge. It was like a viral moment in the endurance sports world. I honestly will say I expected a reaction. I did not expect that type of attention to it, and I'm blown away in the best way possible. I mean, it was amazing. I get kind of choked up thinking about it because people were so supportive and so great. I'm still sorting through emails to respond to people. And I think for me, it was very important to talk about it too at a time where I am not recovered. And that's a bit tough because I think that you see so many people talk about their disorders in the past or their addictions in the past, but it comes from a recovered perspective. I got a lot of feedback saying thank you for being open before you're there, because it's not as simple as that. And I go back and forth on whether total freedom is possible. I feel like the voices get quieter, things they get easier the further and further you get into recovery. But I think that you always kind of have to be vigilant. And maybe you can speak to that too. Yeah, I mean, I'm of the mind that there is no recovered. Mm-hmm. There's recovery. There's being active in your recovery. I would never consider myself recovered. Yeah. And I had a relapse 8 years ago after I'd been sober for 13 years. I'm very aware of how fragile it is and how it requires, constant attention and focus. And that's not to say that, your situation is the same. It's different. But I would be curious about is there a sense that there is a recovered when it comes to relationship with food? I just feel that impulse is always there, and keeping it at bay, is important. And there's tools for doing that. But to fall under the belief that it could disappear altogether and never reappear, I think is dangerous. Yeah,
I think there's different mindsets. I think some people think that if you don't believe in that fully recovered is possible, then you're never going to get there. But maybe this might be more of the unpopular opinion, but I do kind of similarly believe to what you do, is that, you can be in a very, very good place of recovery, but you still need to be mindful of things. And especially the longer, this has been 20 years of my life. Mm-hmm. And a lot of this stuff has become so ingrained and automatic in me. And so it's almost in some ways exposure therapy and unlearning habits and things like that didn't happen overnight,
mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's all about where you are in the moment. Mm-hmm. My relationship with this is what am I doing today? Where is my recovery in the middle of this experience that we're having right now? Because I know people with 30 days of sobriety who are super sober, and I know people who've been sober for 35 years who are out of their minds.
Right.
They may not drink, but they don't have they don't have like emotional sobriety, which is really kind of like where there's no destination for that, because you can always iterate and improve on, you know, who you are as a human being. So it's less about where are my cravings for alcohol right now than it is about like, what's up with my character defects? You know what I mean?
It was finally
like, I like being married to my wife. Like I don't want her to leave. Like, so I have to like be on top of this shit.
It's funny when as soon as I started to realize that like the food was no longer like the scary issue, and I was like, God, now I have to work on myself.
Right.
I was like, now I have to like kind of like underpin.
But that's
like
the whole thing.
That is the point.
The universe is driving you. Like this is all about that.
Right. And I think my big thing is that I'm a thinker, and I've always like, no, I know my feelings. For so many years, I was really good at thinking about my feelings, like really, really good at like thinking about my feelings, but not actually like feeling anything. And I think that actually in our society, we prize a lot of thinking over feeling. You know, a lot of people follow like the Stoic like philosophies and things like that, and once I finally started to like tap into what am I feeling right now? And like, then just like not even assigning judgments to that, but and then just actually like being like, feelings are valid too. It doesn't all have to come from the mind.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I think if you're, you know, things like stoicism are great for like corralling your emotional state.
Right.
But I think when it comes at the cost of valuing your, you know, emotional landscape, then you're missing a bigger picture of what it means to be a fully integrated human, you know? And the thing about feelings is they change, right? So when you feel like you're going to die, or this is so painful that you can't go one more minute without picking up the drug or vomiting or whatever it is your thing is, to be able to just be with it and feel it and experience it, knowing that it will go away, like it will dissipate, it will morph into something else.
Yeah, and that you don't need to use your coping mechanism of choice to get, you know, to get rid of that, to manage that feeling.
Yeah, because you're so terrified of feeling that you'll do anything to numb it out, to change your state.
Right. And the longer that we go without feeling those feelings, then the more scared we become of them.
Right.
So it's that
the more powerful they become.
Exactly, that entire avoidance. And so that's why I've been a huge fan of just like exposure therapy in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, one of the things you do every day, and you share it a lot, is the gratitude list.
Yeah, I do. That has been, and that actually has started my friend, Matt Davis, who's actually a fellow podcaster. But he, in recovery himself, and kind of started this movement, and it's just on Instagram, and it's 10 things a day that you're grateful for, which actually seems like a lot, and it can be a lot. But it's been very kind of like it's a tool in my toolkit now, on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a big 12-step thing.
Yeah.
Doing that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because it's one thing to kind of intellectually grapple with gratitude, but feeling it is like a practice. Like I'm not like inclined to walk around grateful. Like I have to, you know what I mean? Like I'm like thinking about what I don't have, you know, all the time. So, and that's not healthy or good.
Yeah.
Like I have to go out of my way to go, what am I grateful for? And not just go, oh, I'm grateful for this, this, and this. But like, let me try to feel that. Yeah. Like it's foreign.
It is foreign. I think there is a part of me though that with the gratitude, a lot of people are moving towards, I mean, the power of gratitude, and it's great. But I also think that there's an issue that if we then feel like if we're ungrateful or if we have negative feelings, and that's not right, because we have so much that we should be grateful for, and then we beat ourselves up that we are, you know.
Shame on you.
Exactly. But it is a very good like daily practice.
Yeah,
sure.
We have to be grateful for all our human flaws too, right? I suppose. So, all right. So you were in the treatment center for like 90 days? Like 3 months,
yeah. So it was about 3 months I was in Seattle. Yeah.
I think that's the appropriate time.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's
think you need at least 3 months.
Everyone's journey is different. I think that they say in terms of like neural reprogramming and things like that, I think 3 months is probably like, is a good period of where you can start to actually like change those neural pathways.
Right. I was in for 100 days.
Yeah.
Just like down the street from where you grew up.
Oh, really?
You know Newburgh?
Yeah.
Yeah. In Newburgh.
We
can talk about that later. But so here you are. You've emerged from this experience. You've shared it. You've been transparent. You've been open. And now you're kind of being perceived in this new light. Like now it went from like, oh, you're so inspiring for what you do athletically to like, oh, it's so inspiring that you allowed yourself to be vulnerable, like the strength in vulnerability that's really connecting with a lot of people. And I think this is really, it is, whether this is your intention or not, like it is this amazing opportunity for you to be of service to a lot of people. I mean, we have an epidemic of disordered eating and eating disorders. There are so many people that struggle with this, that suffer in silence, and to be, this sort of beacon of hope in all of its, flaws and all of that, given that you're early in this process, I think is really a beautiful new, chapter for you.
Yeah. And I don't have a crystal ball to let you know like where I'm going to be. But it is, for me, it's really an opportunity to kind of live all parts of my life. I was like, I don't want to be like the eating disorder recovery girl. I don't want to be the athlete. I don't this is just me. Like I'm super flawed. I'm super complex, just like everybody else out there. And this is just another piece, so I'm just trying to live authentically and stumbling through and figuring this all out. To me, it's been very, very connecting to so many different people.
Well, what I hear in that is a healthy relinquishment of control. Like you can't control whatever the media narrative is going to be around this. But you do have the ability to reframe your own story and to make it more expansive than Amelia, the obstacle course champion, or Amelia, the ultra athlete, or Amelia, the attorney. Like you're a spiritual being having a human experience and all of its, wondrous beauty and pain. Right. Where this goes, we don't know. But I would imagine this has now put you in a situation in which you have to figure out yet another relationship with sport, right? Like how are you now kind of venturing forward in that world?
Yeah. So I spent a lot of time, and a lot of my work in treatment was being very curious about my relationship with sport and about my identity as an athlete, and where that fits in my life. And so I still have a pull to sport. It's not going anywhere. I think for me, it's very much, more for the experiences now. I have an urge to compete. And I think I went to one portion of myself, or I went to like one side where I used to be all about the competition and the winning. And then I moved to this, it doesn't matter. Winning doesn't matter. Competition doesn't matter.
I'm going to enter these races where nobody finishes.
Right. Yeah. And now I'm kind of recognizing like, my therapist told me, she goes, wanting to win a race isn't a bad thing. It's just what you do when you don't win that race. And so I spent a lot of time, working and evolving that relationship with the competition, and lots to say on that at some point, I'm sure. But so now I'm looking, to get back into racing again and get back into sport. Just probably not, I kind of just things that kind of light my soul on fire. When I talk to my coach about it, and I talk to him about a race, and he goes, well, does it light you up? And that's kind of my gauge about where I really want to go with this. And so I've kind of taken a step back in the early stages of recovery from competing, just because it's a lot to add into the mix.
Well, I'm glad you have a coach.
Yes. Yeah. I do have a coach. He has been with me he inherited me with I started working with him, and then a week later I ended up with my stress femur stress fracture, and that was not his fault at all, clearly, because it was already there. Yeah. But has actually been like the greatest source of me really, owning this journey and seeking treatment and recovery and whatnot. So.
Are you physically like cool now? Is everything?
Yeah. Aside from when I kicked a bench in the sauna and broke my toe the other day.
Oh no.
That was annoying. But physically, beyond that, yes, I'm healthy, and as I told everybody, running feels great when you feed yourself properly. So.
Imagine that.
It's amazing. My calcaneal stress fracture healed in record time when I was there in treatment.
Because you were putting nourishment in your body.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I think I told you this before, but I think that you and Burkle should do Otillo, because that would be super fun. And it's so different, and like. Right. There would be no expectations, and it's difficult, and it's cold and miserable and awesome, and
all those things that
it's
I love,
unlike anything you've ever done before.
Yeah,
and to do it with a teammate also makes it not really about you and your performance.
Right.
And I think you, with all the swimming you've been doing, I think that could be fun. I want you guys to do that.
I want. We've talked about it. I know they have a race down here.
There's one in Catalina,
which I think would be kind of a good testing of it. I'm doing my first ocean swim tomorrow, so we'll see. But that's
with Caroline, right?
Yeah, with Caroline. But in that's very different ocean swim than
Is it a race, or you're just going down to swim?
I'm just going to swim.
Okay.
Because I haven't done. I've actually never swam in the ocean before. But it's like a nice warm summer ocean.
Oh, it'll be great.
But
it'll be awesome.
I'm not a great swimmer. Nobody's ever actually watched me swim, but.
I wouldn't worry about it. Yeah. Well, I want to kind of round this down by talking a little bit about, for people that are listening who either are suffering from this, or they're a parent who has a child suffering from this, or they have a family member or something like that. I think it could be really instructive and helpful to kind of walk through, how people can manage this, like what to look out for, how to try to help somebody who is in this condition, and like what not to do.
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, one big thing to recognize is that it's not about the weight. And I think, in terms of approaching somebody, that you never know how people are going to take it. If you say, "Hey, I've noticed you've lost a lot of weight," or you've so it's more about pointing out to people like behaviors, or them withdrawing, or just really just checking in on them, being like, "I noticed you've been kind of like not showing up to group runs or group dinners, or like what's going on?" Because as I know, my doctor's always told my parents is like, you can't recover for her. Like you can't force her to recover until she's ready. But it's kind of just that like reinforcement that you are there for them. And that, in checking in, on them. And I think that sometimes though, when things are dire, like if it does seem to be like a medical necessity state, sometimes you have to be the bad guy. I mean, when my roommates intervened with me in college, I didn't speak to them for the next several months. Like literally was so angry, but they, helped save my life. And so in situations like that, sometimes if you're willing to be the bad guy, it can be very useful to just go straight for it.
The tough love thing.
The tough love. And I'm sure, like anybody who's ever had an intervention done for them, like you hate everybody in that moment. But it can be completely necessary.
Yeah, it can be. And sometimes it works and often it doesn't, because that person isn't willing. So I think for anybody who's listening, who's considering intervening on somebody else's situation, it's important. I mean, there may be a good reason to do that, and it might be advised, but I think it's important to have a healthy relationship with outcomes and not be attached to whether it's going to work or not.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. And know going into it that, there's a risk that could completely implode your relationship. But it's I look back at all of this now and I'm like, man, I'm trying to figure out like what actually like stuck, the times that what people said. And there's no rhyme or reason, to be totally honest, because I've had interventions or people say things to me at times where it didn't resonate. And then other times where it's just an offhand comment that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Timing is a weird thing with this. Right. It's like, you've got to live your life in a certain way and get to the point where you really want to do something, and nobody can compel that willingness.
No. And I think unless you clearly have like a minor child or things like that, there are situations.
But you can't make somebody want it.
No.
I mean, you can make somebody go to a place.
Right.
And you can, get them sent somewhere, but you can't actually catalyze their desire to actually be healthy.
No. And they'll go through the motion. And I did it. I went through the motions. I did everything that, you said I should do, and got discharged and went on my way. And then I've had people say, okay, well then, Amelia, what's different about this time then, and honestly, I could say, well, who knows? But I think that for me, it's this time it came from myself. And that's really like the key difference, as opposed to somebody else kind of pushing you towards it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think the thing for you is just, like I said before, like, is really having a setup that holds you accountable, like a community of people that you talk to, and, a protocol that's keeping you on the path.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so important. And with, anybody and going through any type of recovery from any type of mental illness or mental health issue.
What are the signs to look out for? Like, what are some things that people that are in the grips of this thing do, like, early, before it's obvious? Where, like, if a parent's listening to this, and like, what should they be looking out for?
I will say, I'm aware it's hard to generalize because they are so different, but I would say skipping meal times, or like finding excuses. This is my own experience. So finding excuses to not eat with people, subtly kind of like restricting food intake, being very kind of secretive around food is something to look out for. Body image talk, things along those lines. But that's tough because there's so much.
Well, we're in crazy town now.
I know. And so it is tough to say, like, when somebody like pokes at themselves and was like, I don't like how I look. I'm like, is that an eating disorder? Or is that,
right. Are you like looking at the Kardashians all day long in your Instagram feed?
Right.
What are you doing?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, as a parent of 2 daughters, like, we're in the middle of all this right now.
Oh,
and
I can
with
imagine.
our 15-year-old, like, she just deleted everybody. She's only follows her friends now.
Good.
And that's a big part of it.
I think that's huge. I think that, and I know me personally, I have unfollowed anybody who's like, seems to be promoting that type of like diet culture and that, anything that wouldn't be conducive to like my own recovery. But I do think that, with teenagers and, with kids, probably one of the best things that you can do as a parent, and I say this actually not as a parent, is just being a role model in how you approach food, and because people don't realize that kids pick up on a lot of stuff, so if you sit there and demonize certain foods or, a lot of diet talk, like, kids can pick up on that. Mm-hmm. And I say this, and, like, that was never in my family. My family didn't have any of that disorder or diet talk, yet I still have an eating disorder. Right. So at some point for parents, I think it's also that, it's not always on you, mm-hmm. it's not your fault mm-hmm. as well.
And I think as an athlete, like in the athletic context, it's very easy to hide your disorder, under the mask of like training and performance. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a lot of people, amateur athletes and endurance sports and other sports that are actively in the throes of this. And, it's just not evident. It's harder to spot.
It's harder to spot because you can frame it in terms of like, well, but I'm doing it for performance.
Yeah. And men too, I should say. This is not just a female thing.
Absolutely. And I think it's even tougher for men because I think it's not as, I don't want to say socially acceptable to have an eating disorder, but there is like, there not as many men speak out about it.
Yeah, it's a little bit of, there's a weird like kind of like tinge of taboo around that, I suppose.
Yeah, and there are some Mario Ferrolli has like spoken out about his and whatnot. But I think that, in the athletic world, it's absolutely difficult. And what's unfortunate is that some of the times that I think that I have actually been struggling the worst have been the times where I have looked the most the most quote unquote normal outwardly. And that there are many people in normal sized or larger sized bodies who are really, really struggling, but because they don't have the physical manifestation of it, it's harder to pick up on.
Yeah, no one would identify it.
Right.
Yeah.
And luckily the eating disorder treatment model and everybody in the industry has finally started to realize that you can have an eating disorder of any size body. So that's been very important. So I think in terms of picking up signs, it's mainly about behaviors because body size is not going to indicate anything.
Yeah. The social withdrawal too.
I think the social withdrawal. Yeah. And any time, I think really, avoiding meal times, skipping that kind of stuff is a big red flag.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's land this plane with one final question, which is, is there anything that like you want to say to like, is there anything that you feel like is misunderstood about you and this story that you want to like make clear? Like, I feel like it's been completely embraced, but I'm not you. Yeah. So I just want to make sure that you have the opportunity to like really speak your truth and not be misunderstood.
I am aware that there are folks out there who believe that like I should not be engaging in sport and also be in recovery. And I understand. I think that can be a completely valid concern. It is also something that I've worked through a lot, like with my treatment team. And everyone's relationship with movement is entirely different. And so for some people, it shouldn't be a part of the recovery. For others people, it can be. And I continually, it's part of mine now. But I continually every single day constantly question that and very, very always curious. And as you talked about, and that, am I trading one compulsion for another? But I think the key is just to be very curious about your intentions and your motivations behind things. I'm always a work in progress, as we all are.
We all are. Anybody who says otherwise, don't trust them.
I mean, I'm just like, I don't have anything figured out. I'm just stumbling around, like putting the pieces together. And
how are your parents doing?
They're good. I think that I love my parents. They're so fantastic. And they've been kind of those like silent supporters that will be there for me. And I think that they're excited to see me. Not so much, I mean, yes, like, be in recovery for the eating disorder, but just to be a more like living person, embracing life.
That's the way I kind of look at this whole thing from 10,000 feet. Like, you're on this journey to becoming a fully integrated, actualized, authentic human being. And you had to take these disparate, puzzle pieces and find a way to put them together. So like, you're assembling yourself in a new way. And I think the more you create that alignment and that consistency in all these various areas, and writing this blog post and being here today are a big part of that. It's going to lead to something like amazing and beautiful, because it's so powerful to be in that place of truth and honesty where you're not shying away or feeling shame or feeling like, you have to like couch your words because you don't want to say this or that. Like, now you can just be who you are and stand in that and look people in the eye. And that's just like it's like a very powerful place to be. So I think whatever's coming next for you, I'm super excited to see what that is.
Thank you. I am excited as well. I think I'm hopeful.
Cool. All right. Well, I think it was courageous of you to come here today and share all of that. So I acknowledge you for that, and I thank you for that. And I think it's going to be helpful to a lot of people. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. And if you want to connect with Amelia, AmeliaBooneRacing.com.
Yes.
Amelia Boone on all the social platforms.
Except for Instagram, I'm AR Boone 11.
Oh, AR Boone. AR Boone 11. What happened there? Did somebody take your name?
No, I was very late to the Instagram game, and I also didn't expect that. I mean, so I was just I was just going to try.
Name should give it to you.
I tried it. I don't know who has Amelia Boone.
You're in Silicon Valley. You can't get that sorted out.
I tried to get AmeliaBoone.com too, and that person did not want to give it up. Who is that
person? Wow.
He keeps it for his granddaughter or something like that. I'm serious. I've tried to hunt him down and pay him for it.
Cool. All right. Well, come back and talk to me again sometime. Peace. Food.